Hey you guys, it's Peter, and welcome to my channel, Peterisms, where I tell stories of my life and just little things that I have learned as I have grown into the person that I am today. And I brought both meditation books with me today from Melody Beatty, but I think that I'm going to read from Journey to the Heart because I haven't really read much from this lately. So I wanted to get into here. I wanted to get in here and see what the meditations have said the last couple days. Today is November 23rd. Let's see what wisdom Melody Beatty is bringing to us through Journey to the Heart. I love this meditation book so much, but if you're looking for a meditation book, if you're going to buy like a self-help book for somebody for Christmas or a holiday gift or a birthday or whatever, both of these are so adversely different. So this is the sister book to Codependent No More. And I love both of these. This is very recovery-based, and recovery not just necessarily like a 12-step recovery from addiction, but recovery mostly from codependency. So if you're going to read this one, I would highly recommend reading Codependent No More first. And if you're going to buy them, I would get Codependent No More and this one, because Codependent No More is basically, it's the self-help book about codependency. This is the everyday, the daily affirmations, the daily meditations that go along with it. It's a sister book to it. But if you're just reading this and you haven't read Codependent No More by Melody Beatty, it's fantastic. It's probably one of the top 3 books that has like profoundly changed my life the most. This one, Journey to the Heart, is more like stories and her sharing like how she's got back, like she was lost and she found herself again. My emotional side of me tends to go, like, I like these a little bit more, but the language of letting go has taught me more. I think I learn more about things because these are pretty direct in here, whereas these kind of like, they're stories and things like that, which I love storytelling, so I relate to that. That's why back in the day, now I usually save these for when I'm making videos, but back in the day, I would always, these were like the first 2 meditations I would read, long before I was reading them on video. So, okay, let's get into November 23rd, and it is Discover the Power of Your Heart. And yesterday's was Open Up to Who You Are. And let's read today's and yesterday's. So let's start with yesterday's, because sometimes they kind of float into each other. November 22nd, Open Up to Who You Are. Stop criticizing yourself. Stop telling your, I said they weren't direct, and it comes right out the gate. It says, stop criticizing yourself. Well, you should stop criticizing yourself. We are sometimes our worst critics. I mean, I'm sure you've heard that statement before. I think it's true. I think when I look back on my life, all the things that have been said about me, all the things that, the mean names I've been called through the years ever since I was a little kid. And I think about, I'm probably the one that's been the hardest on myself ever in my entire life. I've said things that are meaner to myself than anybody could ever think up. Okay, open up to who you are. Stop criticizing yourself. Stop telling yourself everything you think, feel, want, and do is wrong. Or at least not quite right. You've been holding back, censoring yourself for too long. Your creativity, your intuition, the voice of your soul is the very voice you've been silencing. Wow. For many reasons, we learn to criticize and censor ourselves. We may have grown up with people who stifled our inner voice, our wisdom, and our knowledge of truth. This is what I was talking about when I was a kid, being bullied. Our sense of the truth may have caused them to feel uneasy, so they told us to hush. It met their needs to keep us quiet. So we learn to hush ourselves, because if you question things, like I grew up this way. It's interesting because I grew up with a mom that said question everything, But when you start questioning things, you start, asking questions and whatever. People don't like that sometimes, right? So we learned to hush ourselves. It was how we survived. And it's interesting that she says this in here because I can remember when I really understood that I was the target of other people's cruelty. I learned that it was easier to stay silent and just kind of like float into the background. And sometimes they would pick another target. Most times it didn't really matter. One of the things that I've learned about bullying through the years, I think it's probably been the harshest reality for me is, the hardest reality for me. I've read all the articles online. I've seen people talk about it. I've talked to experts about it, and all that kind of stuff. I've gone through it all myself, right? I think one of the harshest realities that I've learned is that, and not so much maybe kids, but like I think it's even harder for people as adults when they're bullied in the workplace, by their own family members, in their friend group. I think what's really hard, especially with adults, is what you realize is, like, when I was growing up, you were always told, like, bring it to somebody, and like a teacher or counselor or whatever, and they'll deal with it. But I think what we all know, innately is that just makes it worse, right? Like, that just makes it 100 times worse. I knew that. What I've learned as an adult is that to say something about it makes it worse. To stay silent makes it worse, right? Because they're just really unwell people. They're just people that are that cruel are people that are just really unwell inside. They're very miserable people. And so they, like, if you don't give them, like back in the day when I was growing up, it's like, if I didn't give these kids the attention by crying or complaining or whatever, they just came harder at me to force a response. And if I did cry, then they just made fun of the response. So there was really no point. It's like, there was no move I could make. I think that's part of, like, as I go through and I decipher the bullying that I experienced when I was a kid, I think that was probably one of the hardest things, was that I felt so completely powerless. It didn't really matter what I did. I couldn't rationalize with them. There was no rationalizing with them, right? And so if I stood up for myself, that made it worse. And if I didn't do anything else, then they just did it harder until I wanted to stand up for myself, or I did say something. And so what I learned was just to float into the background and then just become immune to it and just deal with it when it happens and just take it. That's really the reality. It's like years ago I made this video talking about that, like, people always say, like, the nice guy always finishes last. Sometimes the nice guy doesn't finish at all. Sometimes the bullies win. Sometimes they do. That's the hard reality of life, is that sometimes the cruelty of the world, the meanness of the world, that wins, and it's more powerful than others. But I think at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, sometimes there is no, exact answer on how to deal with that. But like what this meditation says is you can take out one voice. One of the things I learned in, recovery is I can't control other people, places, and things, but I can control myself. I can control my reaction, and I can control whether I'm criticizing myself. I can control whether or not I feel the necessity to engage in that back and forth, like when I was a kid. I can choose today whether, I stop the tape in my head of criticizing myself. And that's really what this meditation is about. It's really about controlling what you have control over, which is only thing you have control over is yourself, No longer do we have to meet other people's needs. Not that way. We don't have to be afraid of ourselves or what we will find if we look inside. We don't need to run from ourselves. We don't need to hide or hush ourselves. We are creative, loving, purposeful beings. It's time to open up to yourself, to your grandest dreams and aspirations, your real inclinations and desires, your wisdom and knowledge about what is true and what is real. Open up to who you are. Listen to yourself. Express yourself. Enjoy who you are, and you will find others enjoying you too. I think one of the most difficult lessons I've had to learn in this world, what's the saying? I see it go around all the time, that some people will love you, some people will hate you, and none of it will have anything to do with you. And I've really had to learn that the hard way, right? That I have to be exactly who I feel in my heart of hearts it's important for me to be. I have to, and that's not about standing up, for myself. One of the things that's also been a hard lesson for me is that, like, those kids that bullied me in elementary school, junior high, high school, adults that have bullied me in adulthood, very little of it has anything to do with me. I mean, very little of it does. If you throw that in somebody's face and you say it's because this person is miserable, who do you know out there that will admit to you and say, yes, I'm a cruel person because I'm so miserable inside and I'm so angry and I have these pent up resentments at everybody else in the world, so I'm going to take it out on that person. Nobody's going to say that. They're not going to say that, right? That's too much accountability that you're asking from a very sick person. It's definitely too much accountability that you're asking from a 7-year-old kid that doesn't even know what accountability is, right? So what I really had to realize, and I think, and what helped me through the years was talking to people that were part of that bullying when I was growing up. And what they'd say to me is, if you knew what my childhood looked like, if you knew what my home looked like, I was in such misery that school was an escape for me. So you're the easy target. I mean, I've heard that from enough people to realize it's never really been about me. I was just the medium, for them to get some attention, or from them to find, like it was a moment of escape or a moment of joy and happiness, I mean, that's one of the things that I had to learn. And I think that's a hard thing to learn, that looking back on my life, you know, I'm doing this bullying narrative with my therapist. And one of the things my therapist said, you know, we were talking about all these people that, like, you know, had bullied me growing up and all through the years and whatever. And he said, can you find any solace in the fact that the one kid that had a absolutely miserable childhood at home, okay, or the adult that has a miserable life today, that maybe you are the one respite from that? I'm like, but I don't deserve that. No, absolutely. He said, you don't deserve that. You don't deserve that at all, right? But it's not always about what do we deserve and what is fair. It's about understanding it a little bit, you know? And that's one of the hardest lessons I've had to learn, is that it's really, none of it's ever been about me at all. None of it's ever about me, you know? And if you were bullied, or you have been, or you're bullied in the workplace or by family members, it's really not about you. It's really about the misery and the condition of those people's lives, but they're never going to admit to that, so there's no point to even bring it up, right? So then at that point, what you've decided is, do you want peace and serenity in your life? What is it about, you know? And that's where I always talk about being too much, you know, and that's where this meditation in here says at the very end, this is where I love this meditation, it says, it's time to open up to yourself, to your grandest dreams and aspirations, your real inclinations and desires, your wisdom and knowledge about what is true and what is real. Open up to who you are. Listen to yourself, express yourself, enjoy who you are, and you will find others enjoying you too. You know, I think that's been one of the greatest lessons out of all of this that I've learned, you know, through the years since I was 5 years old, is that when I am myself, when I am true to my soul, I attract people that are similar to that are like-minded, that enjoy me for being too much. It's why I say be too much, right? You've only got one life. Never compromise yourself for somebody else. You know, you're not going to look back on your life and say, I wish I would have been a little bit more quiet. I wish I would have hushed down. I wish I would have molded into the wall a little bit more, you know? You're not going to look back and say that. I can tell you that because I don't look back on my childhood and say to myself, wow, I wish I would have been a little bit quieter, because then maybe they wouldn't have picked on me so much. What I know is it didn't really matter what I did. I could have shouted from the mountaintops, or I could have been the quietest mouse in the world. It didn't really matter. They were cruel kids, and they were going to act out in cruel ways, you know? Hurt people hurt people. I know that today. I don't have to engage in that, okay? But I know that today. But I can't let other people get in my head when I only have a limited amount of time on this earth anyway. I'm not going to let somebody else, you know, not let what they had to think about me from when I was 6 years old all the way to now, not let me enjoy my life. I'm going to be too much. I'm going to do the things that make me happy, you know? And you should too. Absolutely, you should too. Because life is short and life is fragile. And you don't want to look back on it and be like, well, I wish I had done this, or I wish I had worn that, but I was too afraid to, or I wish I had gone to this concert, but I was afraid that what people would think about me if I went to this concert, or I wish I had read those books, or I wish I had taken that stance, or I wish I would have spoken up to that person, you know? But I was too afraid to, because it was just easier to get along with them than to speak up and say, you know, I don't agree with how you're doing this or you're doing that or whatever, you know? I wish I had watched those movies. I wish I had watched those. Do the things that make you happy. You want to cook, learn to cook. You want to garden, learn to garden. You want to crochet, learn to crochet, you know? And if somebody looks at you and says, well, you should stop that. That's stupid. Don't crochet. Don't start putting your needles down. Pick them up and do it more, you know? And it's not about proving those people wrong. It's not. That's the other thing I had to learn, right? It's not about proving anybody wrong. It's not about being the best crocheter in the world to prove somebody wrong. You know, I wanted to show up to my high school reunion, and I wanted to show the 20-year reunion, and I wanted to show those people they didn't keep me down. I wanted my Romeo and Michelle high school reunion moment, and I got it to some degree. I had so many people that came up to me and apologized and said to me, I am so sorry. I had people coming up to me that I didn't even remember from high school that said that they, like, talked bad about me behind my back and were so cruel to me and stuff like that, right? I was nice to every single one of them. I was like, you know what? We were kids. It doesn't matter, blah, 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 whatever, right? You know, I wasn't going to be mean to them in that moment that they were coming up to me and whatever. I had that Romeo and Michelle high school reunion. But what I noticed and what walking away from that event was, it didn't really matter. It didn't really matter that I proved to them that they didn't get me. You know what? Because for 20 years, they weren't living thinking, I wonder if we got him. I was. That was in my head. Because, see, we borrow those things, right? Be too much. Live your best life. Do what makes you happy as long as you're not hurting somebody else. You know, check yourself on what you're putting out there in the world. You know, my dad used to say to me, I don't care what you do as long as you're a positive contribution to the world. Do something that makes you happy. Do things in life that make you happy. Spend time with people and pets and animals and where in the world you want to be that make you happy. You don't owe an explanation to anybody for that, you know? And get out of your head with whatever other people have told you. Because I think what happens over time is I still have voices in my head of things that people said to me when I was 6, 7, 8 years old that I don't even know where those people are today. But that thought has resonated for over 40 years and it has got into my head and is part of this tape that I have to rewrite on a regular basis. Don't let that happen. Don't. I've had to fight against that for 40 years. People want to ask me, why are you still talking about this? Why aren't you over being bullied? Well, because when the same thing is told to you over and over and over again, you start to believe it. It's why one of my favorite lines from Pretty Woman is when he says, you're so beautiful, and she says the bad stuff is easier to believe. When somebody tells you something long enough, you start to believe it. She wasn't 12 in the movie. She was an adult saying that. When somebody tells you something over and over again, you start to believe it. Don't believe in the lie. You know your worth. You deserve good things. I do, you do, we all do. Even, and this is the hardest thing, I had to learn to want for the people that dislike me the most, the same things for them that I want for myself. I had to see them as human beings. You know, it's one of the reasons why I say the prayer for the sick man, you know? Help me to grant them the same tolerance I would grant a sick friend. Because I don't know what that person's going through. I don't know why that person has pain. Just like I didn't know in first grade why that person was being cruel to me. But sometimes it's about the understanding and the not engaging in it, right? And the living your life to the best of your ability because you deserve it. You absolutely deserve it. Know your worth. And instead of criticizing yourself, tell yourself your worth. You deserve it. I love you guys, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.